Welcome back to Fusion 360 for Woodworkers. Today is all about drawings. If that sounds good, stick around. So we've pretty much reached the end of our journey building a bookcase in Fusion 360. The final thing I want to look at is how do we now turn our design into drawings that we can use in the workshop, and also looking at some cut lists. I know a lot of you have been waiting for this one. Let's get straight into it and have a look at drawings. Now you're going to find the drawing command in a number of different places. First of all, up here on your workspace menu, at the bottom here you've got drawing, and you have two choices, from design or from an animation. So design is exactly what we've been working on. We've been working in the design workspace pretty much, and we've created a design of a bookcase. That's the design it's talking about. And the second one is from an animation. There's an animation workspace that allows you to manipulate the parts of your design, do exploded diagrams, you can do videos for things opening and closing, and you can also create drawings from that as well. A bit advanced for what we're looking at in this series, so we're not going to go into the animation pane, but we are going to look at the drawing pane from a design. You're also going to find it in the file menu up the top here, file, new drawing, from design or from the animation. And you'll notice underneath that there's a new drawing template as well. Now if you do a lot of these, like I do, I have a specific Woodgrafter template that gives the various company logos, the company name, the information I want to capture on a regular basis, and I create an overall template that we can use. We're not going to do that today, we're going to create a new one from the design. Now you can also right click on any of your components here on the side tree, and that also gives you a create drawing that would then create a drawing from that selected component or subset of components. So they're the three places you can get to, from your workplace menu, your file menu, or the right click menu on a component. Just before we get into it, you'll notice I've just changed this side tree. Before I start doing drawings, I tend to clean up my design. You probably guessed from this series that my designs are pretty organic. I have a clear idea what I want to achieve, and I've got a rough idea of what it's going to look like, but then I design it as I go, and that very often gives us quite a complicated tree. So once I've completed the design to this point, I ask myself, how would I build this? And then I create a number of components that reflect that workflow. First thing I'm going to build is the carcass. The second thing I'm going to build are the doors. The final thing I'm going to build are the drawers, and then I'll put the extras on, which in our case are just the knobs and the hinges and the bits and bobs there. So I've now got a very, very simple workflow. So I create components that reflect that workflow. Then inside each of those components, I just drag the bits that I need. So inside here, I've got the base panel, the left panel, the top panel, the drawer divider subassembly, mid-shelf subassembly, the top molding, the back, etc. So I put these in the right place. Once I've created the workflow and the structure I want in my tree, I then give these a number. And if I right click on carcass and come to properties, you can see that my carcass is part number 1. It's called carcass and it's a subassembly. If I then click on the drawer dividers as an example here and look at the properties, you can see I've called that part number 1.4. So base panel is 1.1, left panel is 1.2, top panel is 1.3, and drawer dividers is 1.4. And again, I know it's a subassembly. If I then click on the small left shelf, you can see that's called part number 1.4.1. So by grouping these together in these workflows, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, the subassemblies is a major increment, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and the sub-subassemblies or the components as a minor increment, 1.4.1, 1.4.2, etc. It just gives me a bit of a part number, and these numbers then I can use in the workshop to identify the components. So it's well worth going ahead and just cleaning up that menu. Just to give you a tip, if I look at this internal panel here, you can see that's made up of those internal panels. If I didn't want a subassembly here, I could just right click on those and I can just drag them up to the carcass. You can't just drag them up and down here, you've got to drag them up to the component you want to be part of. So no longer part of internal panels, I want to take them up to the carcass and drop it into there. And that will then put them in the appropriate place. But it will still retain this subassembly here, this internal panels sub-assembly that we have, but now there's nothing inside it. And you might feel the need to delete that to tidy this up. And indeed, if you right click on that, you will see a delete command. Now the tip is, do not use delete. You don't want it in your tree, you don't want it visible, but if you delete it, watch what happens. We get an error saying this feature is referenced by other features in the timeline. Are you sure you want to delete this? Well, yeah, let's go ahead and let's delete it. And straight away, it's deleted all my components, because although we've taken them out of that component of that subassembly, they're still referenced by that subassembly. So you don't actually want to go ahead and do that. Control and Z to undo that move. What you can do instead is right click on this, and there's a command here called remove. Now if you use the remove command rather than delete, that will take the subassembly out of your tree, bang, but it still retains the reference inside Fusion, so your project will still work. So you could use that to reorientate these as you wish. I'm happy with my subassembly, so Control Z twice to put that back into place. Now the information that you put inside properties, as we've discussed in the past, is manual. So your part number is something that you add in, your part name is taken from the component name, and the description, we just put the dimensions in from the bounding box. Now if you change the component name here, the part name will update. If you move the order, the part number will not update. If you resize the model, the description will not update in terms of its length, width and thickness. That's a manual thing you're going to have to go back in and do. So there you go. So think about the workflow of how you would build it in your workshop. Create the components to represent the key activities in the job and move everything around to make it nice and clean. Perfect. So let's go ahead and start a drawing. I'm just going to right click on bookcase design and I'm going to create a drawing. Now this is your drawing menu and you've got some choices. Well, what is it you want to reference first of all in the drawing? What are the contents? You've got a choice of a full assembly, which is what we've got there. You can see it's all highlighted in blue. You've got a choice of only visible components, i.e. just things you can see on the screen, anything you can't see will not be included. Or you can do a selection, and we'll look at a selection shortly, but for now we'll do a full assembly. Now what's your destination? Do you want to create something that's new? And that's our only option at this point. Once we've created the drawing and we put more components in it, we will get some additional options in that drawing menu, and we'll look at those shortly, but for now we'll create new. Now what's a template? Remember when I said in the file menu we could create a template? You can choose that template from here. So you've got from scratch, you're going to use the default template, or I can browse for the template that I've made previously. Standard, you've got a choice of ISO or ASME, so international standards or American standards. Use the one that's right for you. Units, millimeters or inches, it will always default to the one you've got in your project, but you can override that. And then your sheet size, so in my case I'm using ISO, so it's ISO sheet sizes. If I was using ASME, it's ASME sheet sizes, and I'm sure you'll recognise those depending which country you are in. I'm going for ISO, and my printer is an A4 printer, and I want that orientation. So I've now said I want all of my full assembly components, and I want a new drawing created from scratch using ISO millimeters on an A4 sheet. Then click OK. And then this is a sheet that comes up. We'll look around this in a second, but you can see that's now given me a picture of all the components we've selected. So I'm just going to put that in the center for the second, and just left click and just leave it there, just so we can have a look around this menu. We'll come back to that, don't worry about it. But the first thing to notice, it's actually created a new diagram. So our original bookcase design is still here on this tab, and Untitled is now a drawing. That's the first thing to note. It's not going to create this inside the workspace. Although we've got a drawing workspace here, it doesn't create it in that tab. It creates an entirely new document. That's just the way that Fusion handles it. This document is linked to this document, so if you update one, you'll update this as well. So it is a dynamic association, but just bear in mind that is a different document. So the first thing you want to do is to save this down. So click on the Save button up here. What do you want to call it? Well, I'm going to call it Bookcase Design 2020 version 41 drawing. And my location is in the Bookcase 2020. Now that location are the projects that you'll have made previously. So that's the same Bookcase 2020 project folder that the main design is in. So that's good enough for me. Save that down. Now I just for a second come back into my data panel and I look at the bookcase folder. You can now see inside my folder I've got the original design, but I've also got my design drawing. So it does keep it all together in terms of a project, it's just a separate document. Let's have a look at this, let's orientate ourselves. This is obviously your workspace now. This is the sheet and it's a direct graphical representation of what you're going to print out. This lot down here, this is your title bar and we can edit and we can change that. This is obviously the component we brought in and we can change the views, layout, size and scale of that and add some measurements. We'll look at that in a second. And this is just a border that it drops in that you may or may not want to use. Across the top here you've got some drawing views. You've got the base view. Now a base view is this first one that you put in. So in our case the base view is all of the bookcase. A projected view, that can do a front projection, top projection, back projection, side projection, isometric projections, all taken from that base view, and we'll be having a look at that. Not so much use in terms of woodworking, but you can do a sectional view. So we could cut halfway through this if we wanted to and just have a look at that cross section. And then a detail view we will be using, we can zoom in to look at a specific area. Modify, we've got two menus, we can move something around, we can rotate it or we can delete it. Geometry, we can add center lines to things, we can add center marks to things, we can put a patterned center mark around a circle, extend the edges out. So all these are useful when you want to add various marks to illustrate something on the diagram, or you can create a new sketch at the bottom. Dimensions, we'll be using an awful lot. We're using this top one that creates linear aligned dimensions, but I can also do ordinate dimensions, linear dimensions, aligned dimensions, angular dimensions, radius, diameter, baseline. So you've got a selection of dimensions. Now Fusion drawing is pretty clever and it will try and select the right one for you. It doesn't always do that, and we'll look at an example on how you use these shortly. I can add text to this, or I can add notes to this. I can add symbols, surface texture symbols, feature controls, or datum identifiers, all to do with engineering drawings. I can insert an image, so if I just put the Woodgrafter logo inside here, we can do that, and we'll look at images shortly. Now tables are going to be interesting to you because tables is where you create your bill of materials. So that'll give you a bill of materials for everything that's currently on your picture. Balloon identifies individual bits. A bend identifier is not something we're going to use, but if you're working with sheet metal, that will allow you to look at the bend that you put in the sheet metal. We can renumber things and we can align the balloons, and we'll look at those two later. And then once I've finished, I can output the entire thing to a PDF, to a TWG, to a DXF, or the tables I can output to CSV, which again is useful for bill of materials. Down the left hand side you've still got your tree, and you can see it just gives you the components you selected before, so you recognise all these components inside here. And as always I can suppress these, so if I wanted to turn off the carcass I can just take that away, and you can see my carcass goes from the diagram. And something that's often overlooked are document settings and sheet settings. So document settings will affect everything inside your document, so I can change the font, the text height, the units, the precision of my dimensions, and we will be using that one, precisions of my angles, and we'll be using that one in a second as well, etc. And I can do that. Document settings will be universal to every sheet that I create, or I can just change some very, very basic things here in the sheet settings, such as the size for the sheet or the title block as well. So you can see that's the side menu. It gives a few rich features in the settings overall, and you can see it gives me the component layout too. Down at the bottom here I've got a pan control and I've got a zoom control, which completes that one. And here I've got a tree that shows the different sheets we have, just one at the moment. The add button will add a new sheet. Okay, so that's the whistle stop tour of the design sheet. Now let's look at the component we've created here. I'm just going to click on it once to get a blue box around it, and then double click on the components I've selected, and that's the initial menu. So when we first open up a drawing, we get this component and we get this side menu. Now all this is talking about that image that we've just put in place. So I've got an orientation at the moment that's front, but I could equally make that the top, and it looks down on our cupboard. I could make it from the right hand side, I can make it from a home, an isometric view, etc. And there's other views that you can play with inside here. it makes sense for this one that I just do a front view. The next one is the style. So visible edges just show exactly as it says, visible edges overall. Hidden edges will show all the visible edges and any joinery we've got inside that's sometimes useful, and again we'll look at that further on. I can then do the same. I can do shaded, and that will shade and colour this in using whatever the texture and the appearance is, and then I can do shaded with the invisible edges. In fact, if you look carefully, you can see dotted lines around there where our panels sit in. Personal preference, I don't tend to use shaded. I tend to go for visible edges with no shading. It just gives me a cleaner diagram. Now I can also use tangent edges. Tangent edges show lines and edges that are at tangent to things. So if I have a full length, if you look at the raised panel, the full length will give me all of that. Now don't forget, our raised panels are at the top of a curve. We cut a curve out, so those lines are tangent to that curve. That'll show the full thing. I can have shortened ones which give me an illustration. I'm not sure we can just see that, it's just broken the lines up. Or I can turn them off completely and then it doesn't show me the raised panel. Again, depending on what you want to do, you may want to put tangent edges inside there. That will give us all the details of the raised panel. Interference edges show where we've got two edges that will interfere with each other. We don't tend to use that. And threaded edges will start to show edges that intersect with curves and cylinders. And again, we don't tend to use that in woodworking. Now the one that is important is the scale. This is a scaled diagram, and at the moment my scale is set at 1 to 50, and I can change that, and there's some common use things here. So if I come to 1 to 20, for example, you can see that gives me a blown up diagram, and that looks quite good. So I can close that down, and there's my diagram. If I just click on it again, I can grab that center block, and I can just move that round, and it's got those green lines that will just sort of snap in to things. So just put that wherever you think looks good. There I think is going to be reasonably good, so we'll do that. And you created your first drawing. Now from here you can do a number of things. If you wanted to put some dimensions in, you can come up to your dimensioning tool. Creates linear, aligned, angular, radius and diameter dimensions. Select the objects, the points, the edges, the existing dimensions, or select 2 points. Then place the dimensions. The most appropriate dimensions type is created, and that's where it gets intelligent. So if I wanted to select some dimensions, I can select this side of our assembly, drag that over, 1216, pick up the bottom and drag that down, 2352. So that will give you a good understanding of what this thing's going to be. Select that point to that point. I can then show that it's got a crown on it that's 1252. I don't like where let's put the 1252. If I press escape to come out the dimensioning tool, click on the number, it gives me a grey drag handle. I can just drag that and I can move the 1252 up at the top there, so that gives me a bit more control. So I now know I've got a bookcase that's 2352 wide, 1216 high, with a crown of 125.2. I might want to know how deep my bookcase is going to be, so I can now come up to here. Projected view generates projected, orthogonal and isometric views. So click on that, click on my base view, which is just covered here, and then just drag the mouse to the right. I'll get a view looking from the left, I'll get a view looking from the bottom, I can get a view looking down from the top, or I can get a view looking from the right. So let's go to a view from the left, just for simplicity, there, okay. And then once you're finished, just press that tick. But you can also do isometric views. You can come up to the corner and start to give you some isometric views that you can drag around. And when you're finished, just press that tick button like so. Now you see by default, it's adopted exactly the same look, feel, properties of the base view. So it's at the same scale, and it's also got the same things in terms of finish. So I can now use dimensioning, come down, and I can just dimension the bottom of this. There you go. So I've now got the base information of our unit inside here. Let's have a quick look at this 125.2, because realistically we're not going to have 0.2 millimeters. So we want to change that. Now if you remember when we were talking about the document settings up here on the left hand side, we had this thing called linear dimension precision and this thing called angular dimension precision. This is a linear dimension, it's going in a linear line from one point to another, where an angular dimension will look as an angle, makes sense. And the precision is how many decimal points are on the back of that. Now we can change this in one of two ways. If I just wanted to change the 125.2 but nothing else on the diagram, just double click on the number. And it brings up this menu here for you, this dimension menu. And here we can do a few things. We can change the precision, so currently it's showing 2 decimal places. I can change that to 1 decimal place or 0 decimal places, which is what we actually want to do. But we'll put it back to 0.12 for the time being. We can insert some symbols around that, so if it was a center point, for example, I can put a center point line. To get rid of that, just press the backspace and just delete it. Tolerance, we can put a tolerance type in here. Symmetrical tolerance, deviations, or a limit around that one. Representations, we can say, are you a reference dimension, are you to scale or not to scale, are you theoretically exact, not much used for woodworking. And inspections, what inspection do I want, round inspection, angular, or no frame, so we can change all the inspections. Now all that's doing is changing the look and feel of this. I'm not going to change anything in this menu, I'm going to close it down. So we've still got 125.2. If you come over to the left hand menu here, and when you hover over any of these, you get that small pencil line. Just click on that pencil and that brings you up a very, very similar menu, but this is going to change the settings to the entire menu. So we know it's ISO, we know it's millimeters, we know it's aerial 3.5, so I can change these things. And if you look down here, I've got my linear dimension precision again and my angular. So I'm going to change it here for the entire document. Set that to 0, and I'm going to set the angular one to 0 as well. And now I'm going to click OK. Now that's actually applied that to every dimension moving forward. It doesn't apply it retrospectively, so we've still got to change this one, but every future measurement we bring would now be lined up. So I delete 1.125.2 as an example, bringing my dimension to that top, to that same point, that top mark we had there, and to that point there. You can see that's now saying 125, and we've lost the 0.2, which is excellent news. Just going to come on the dimension tool, highlight the 125, and now I can drag that back into position where I want it, which was about there. Good. Let's turn our attention to this title box down here. I want to edit this because I don't want all these bits and bobs that come by default. In fact, there's not a lot of information I really want to add in terms of my woodworking diagrams. So what you do, come down, hover over it till it goes black, and left click, and that will just turn it to that blue colour. Right click then on one of the blue bars, and you get this menu here, and coming down you can see this edit title block. So we're going to go ahead and edit the title block. Brings up this menu. What's your source? Well, the source is the existing one. What's the origin block? Well, it's the one we've just selected. If I had a template in here, it would appear. And what name do I want to give it when I've edited it? Don't really care. I'm just going to call it title block number 1. Okay. More importantly, that then brings up for me this box. Now that's the same box that we saw earlier on, but now I can edit this. You do get a small menu with it here. So what's my line type? Are they continuous lines? Are they center lines? Are they hidden lines? Phantom lines? So you can start to create the look and feel and change it here. The problem is it doesn't show up until you actually close it down. I just use continuous lines, to be honest with you. You can change the weight of the lines. You can show the border, which is the piece you see around the outside of your diagram. I can show a layout grid, which is the checkerboard background. You can see that going on and off. And I can snap to that grid as I'm doing my drawings. So that's okay, but ignore the title block. I can also do live editing down here, which is much more important to me. You can see the way this works. I've got this black writing that will always appear on your drawing, and you've got the blue writing, which are things that you change as you type out your document. So you can simply take out the things you don't want. So I'm going to get rid of department. I don't want that, so I select it by clicking on it and then press delete on the keyboard. Get rid of department. Don't want technical reference, get rid of that. Don't want to prove by, get rid of that. Document type, It's quite useful, but I don't care about document status. I'll get rid of that. Drawing number is useful. In fact, I'm going to drag the drawing number out of the way. I'm going to drag the document type down here. Document type will actually also fill in, so we'll just call this document name. Perfect. Revision is good, data issue is great, sheets great. I want some title space here so I can add some text to that. I think we'll take the created by and move that over here. I can now bring the created date over here as well, and then the created by over here. That might be useful information. Delete the document type. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to move the document name up there as well, and we'll move the document title up there too, like so. And then I can bring the title over here of the drawing and bring one of those blue boxes over. So I've got some text, maybe 2 blue boxes will fit. Perfect. Now you can delete these lines, just left click on them. So I don't want that line, backspace delete. Don't want that line, backspace delete. Don't want that line, delete. Don't want the drawing number. Click on these long lines and you've got the grey grab handle at the end. Just bring that in to the end there. Bring that one in to the end as well. Bring that one in to the end as well. And now I can bring that one in to the end as well. And when I'm more or less happy with that, I can just finish the title box. So now you've got your text box looking like you want it to. You can see it auto propagates, name, date, document title. And if I double click on this, those are the blue lines we had, we can now update. So let's give this a description here. This is overview diagram. Revision is going to be 0.1. Date of issue, we can have 29th of the 9th, 2020. And it's sheet number 1 of 1 that's auto propagated. Okay, so you can see I've now got some title inside here. Now we can also add a table in here, and the table starts to detail the parts that we've got very, very simply. So let's look at a table. Come to the top command here. Table generates a part list for single component, assembly and animation references, and bend tables for sheet metal flat pattern references. Basically, it's your bill of materials. So click on the table, and you can see it gives you a table that you can drag around. Now as you come into the corners, you can see that green box. That will snap the corner of your table into the corner of the frame. Similarly on this side, similarly at the bottom, if that makes sense to you, or on the bottom left here. So I'm just going to put our table in the bottom left, like so. And you can see it starts to do a few things for us. It gives us an item number, and it has the same item numbers in these balloons around your object. It gives you the quantity, the number of those you need. It gives you a part number. It gives you a description, and it gives you the material. If you double click on the table, it brings up the part list menu. The first thing you can do is table direction, up or down. So up starts at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, and no surprise, down starts at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, and comes down. Up to you what you use. That looks pretty nice to me. And there's a whole host of information that you can put inside the table. You can put inside the item number, quantity, the part number, the part name, the description, the material, the mass, etc. So there's a whole host of information that you can select, and what you want to display is up to you. So I don't really care about the quantity. For this, I probably don't care too much about the part number. The part name is quite useful, but I don't care about the description. Material might be useful, but I don't really care about the mass. So I can now tune the table accordingly and close that now. And now I can resize the table. If I click on the table once, I get my grey grab handles. Then I can just move that across. I'm going to join it to that box over there. So I've now got a parts list, and you can see part number 1 is the carcass, and it points to the carcass. Part number 2 are the doors, part number 3 are the drawers, and part number 4 are the extras, those handles. Now if you notice, the carcass, doors, drawers and extras are exactly the same as that workflow that I created here. So you can now begin to see how my diagrams start to work. The first thing we're going to look at is the carcass, and now you understand what I mean by the carcass because you've got an arrow pointing at it. The second thing are the doors, the first thing are the drawers, and the final thing putting the extras on it. So you can see how this starts to break down. It's almost an index, I guess. Right, what I now want to do is just to move these bubbles around, and I can change these bubbles. And I just click on them, and again I get these drag handles. Now the one at the end of the arrow here has always got to snap in to the object you want to show it. You can't, for example, put it onto the door. If you put it onto the door and it snaps into the door, you see it changes to a number 2 because it's now picking up the door component. So those arrows and those bubbles are contextual. If I bring it back to the carcass, we know that the crown's part of the carcass. We now see it changes back to number 1. Take the grab handle in the 1 and I can move that up to there, out of the way. Number 2, I'm going to move up to here. That's a messy line, so I'll pick up that part of the door there, number 2. The drawer I'm going to send over here and bring that arrow, and I'll just make sure I'm still picking up the drawer, and then 4 I'll just move up here to show it pointing to the handle. So now I can see my bookcase, the overall design of it. I understand the design of it. I've got some base information from my drawing. I've got the base view, and I've got a view looking from the left hand side of the drawer, and I've got the key assemblies I'm going to be working on, and those are illustrated. So we've now created our first drawing. So there you go, we've now created our first drawing in Fusion 360. In the next episode I want to dig a bit deeper into drawings, and we'll start to look at the components and put some dimensions on the components, and then we'll finish off by doing that all important cut list. See you soon.